talk to you today about Judge Dredd, the fantastic, amazing comic from 2000 AD. They're a British magazine, and we're going to go over a couple of facets of the comic. We're going to go over the history, we're going to go over the continuity, we're going to go over the characters, and we're going to go over the politics. Anybody that is reading Spider-Man, Batman, Iron Man, any mainstream comic should be reading this one. First off, history. It's been around since 1977, which isn't as long as some of the older titles. It was invented by a guy named John Wagner and Carlos Ezquerra. Interestingly enough, John Wagner still writes most of the strips today. Continuity. This is maybe my favorite part for this entire comic. Every time 1 year of real time passes, 1 year of comic time passes. The character is in his late 70s and has aged 1 year with every other year. That brings up some interesting dynamics, especially with characters you wouldn't expect. Let's take villains, for instance. If you could picture Batman arresting the Joker after he's killed millions of people, the Joker goes to prison, and then he gets out and he's 90 years old. The story would take on a completely different dynamic than it is now. Currently, Judge Dredd doesn't have that many villains, because whenever he comes across somebody like the Joker, they get sentenced for their crimes, they get executed, and then the writers have to come up with a completely new set of villains for him to deal with. This also makes a lot of other really neat opportunities. For instance, there's a judge called Judge Giant, who in the very first issue was a rookie judge, and over the years we've seen him grow to, I guess, a middling level judge, to a senior one, to where he has his own cadets. And when characters die, they stay dead. The continuity is not retconned or redone or revised in any way. When something is put in print, it is that way forever. In the comic, there's an entire slew of characters that have been around for many, many years. Some have come and gone, some are still there. One of my favorites was a character called PJ Maybe, who's this serial killer who first debuted when he was only 10 years old and has grown up till we see him evading the judges and committing crimes when he's a teenager, and then again when he's an adult. Probably the most intriguing character out of the entire series, though, is the city itself, Mega City 1, that the entire thing takes place in. The main character, Dredd, never removes his helmet and is a two-dimensional character. In a interview, John Wagner said, this interview is with Rebellion, the people that make the comic, they asked how come he never takes his helmet off, and he said, well, he's supposed to represent justice, so when I was designing him in the 70s with Carlos Ezquerra, he said we never wanted him to take his helmet off because justice has no face. And we wanted the main character, instead of him being the central point for the comic, he was just a lens for the rest of the audience to focus on the events going on in the city, kind of a slice of life, day in the life of a judge sort of thing. Which brings us to our fourth point, politics. This comic is brilliant in the way that it has foreshadowed several events that have happened currently. See if any of this sounds familiar. The city, which is the size of a country, has built a giant wall to keep any kind of outsiders out. The disinterested electoral group that puts people in power elected a giant orange orangutan to basically just entertain the masses while the labor class were denied basic human rights. There's no accountability for the people who are the upper echelons of society and the rich. Sound familiar? That was written in 2000. And the whole orangutan bit happened in 2005, years before our current administration. And that's just one example of them foreshadowing. Back in the 70s, they were predicting that the United States, and remember this is a British comic as a satire of the US, would start developing things like machines where people going through grocery stores could just scan their own items and not need a cashier. Those came into effect 20 years later. There are predictors for the future. The comic itself can be funny, it can be extremely dark, but it's always evolving. And Peter Parker has been in high school or college for like 30 or 40 years.